The day they arrested me, my 5-year-old son pointed at me and told the cops, "It was Daddy. He pushed Grandpa." My wife, Isabella Vance, the CEO of the corporation, collapsed in her brother's arms, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, I can't believe it was you. That's my father. How could you?" As the police snapped handcuffs on my wrists, she screamed with all her might, her eyes a perfect portrait of grief and betrayal. Through the crowd of onlookers, I took one last look at her. She was nestled in her brother Julian's arms, but the corner of her eye flickered toward the company's vice president, Mark Peterson. In that split second of eye contact, I saw it, the irrepressible flicker of joy and the profound relief of a plan perfectly executed. I almost smiled. "Isabella, you're a hell of an actress. Too bad you have no idea what I really do for a living." As the cold steel of the handcuffs closed around my wrists, I was unervingly calm. The squad car's siren wailed as it carried me away from the gilded cage I had built for Isabella with my own 2 hands, a $50 million mansion overlooking Lake Washington. Through the rear window, I could still see her, propped up by Julian and Mark, sobbing so hard it looked like she might pass out. And my son, Cody, was being held by the nanny. His little face was stained with tears, but his eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. Such great acting, such a flawless script. If I weren't living it, I'd be giving them a standing ovation. The lights in the Seattle PD interrogation room were a sterile, buzzing white, beating down on my face. Across the table, 2 detectives, one old and one young, wore grim expressions. Ethan Hayes, male, 35, Chief Technology Officer at Astrotech. "Is that correct?" The older one, Detective Miller, asked, his voice a low grumble as he tapped a folder on the steel table. I nodded. "That's me. We received a call that at 3:15 this afternoon, on the second-floor terrace of your home, you pushed your father-in-law, Arthur Vance, over the railing. Mr. Vance is currently in the ICU at Harborview. He's in critical condition. Do you admit to this?" "I do not," I said, my voice flat and even. The younger detective, Officer Davis, couldn't help himself. "You don't? Your son saw the whole thing. He's 5 years old. Is a 5-year-old kid going to lie?" I lifted my gaze to meet his. "Officer Davis, a 5-year-old might not lie on his own, but he'll repeat what he's been told to say by an adult he trusts. In psychology, it's called an implanted memory." Davis was taken aback, clearly not expecting a murder suspect to calmly lecture him on developmental psychology. Detective Miller held up a hand to silence him, his sharp eyes never leaving my face. "Ethan, we've looked into your background. You're an orphan, graduated from MIT, and built a tech startup from nothing. You created the core architecture for what would become Astrotech. Then you married Isabella Vance, the daughter of Arthur Vance, and merged your tech into Vance Holdings. Everything you have came from the Vance family. So why would you do it? To gain control of the corporation." A dry laugh escaped my lips, sounding harsh and out of place in the small room. "Detective, that's a creative theory. But the fact is, the true core asset of Astrotech was never the Vance family's capital. It's the technology inside my head. Why would I harm a man who, for the most part, treated me decently for something I already own?" "Treated you decently?" Miller raised an eyebrow. "Our information suggests Arthur Vance was never thrilled about you. He thought your blue-collar background made you unworthy of his daughter. That's how it looked from the outside," I said quietly. "Relationships between people are far more complicated than you can imagine." The interrogation hit a wall. They had no physical evidence. Their only eyewitness was a 5-year-old whose testimony was legally shaky at best. But the court of public opinion was already convicting me. Tech genius from the wrong side of the tracks tries to murder his father-in-law to seize control of the family fortune. It was the perfect headline, feeding right into the public's favorite stereotypes. And that's exactly what Isabella and her crew wanted. All they needed was to keep me locked up long enough for them to dismantle everything I'd built and swallow it whole. "Ethan, you'd be wise to cooperate. It'll go easier for you." I leaned back in a hard plastic chair, trying to find a comfortable position. "Detectives, I need to see my lawyer." Miller stared at me for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fine." I gave him a name. "I want to see Alex Chun." At the name, both Miller's and Davis's expressions shifted. Alex Chun, Seattle's most notorious defense attorney. a shark known for turning unwinnable cases on their heads. His fees were astronomical, and he had a reputation for not taking clients who were actually guilty of the heinous crimes they were accused of. They were probably wondering how a CTO, even a well-paid one, could afford to have Alex Shun on speed dial. They didn't know that Alex was my best friend from college. While I was earning my first million-selling lines of code, he was making a name for himself winning impossible lawsuits. We used to joke that one day, he'd rule the courtroom while I ruled the boardroom, and we'd always have each other's backs. But for Isabella, I had spent years hiding my ambition, content to be the man behind the woman. Everyone had forgotten that Ethan Hayes was never a lamb to be led to the slaughter. I spent the next 48 hours in relative peace. I knew that on the outside, Isabella and Mark were celebrating, moving fast to strip me of my power at the company. They thought I was trapped, helpless. On the third day, Alex arrived. He wore a tailored gray suit, and his eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses were as sharp as ever. "How did you let it get this bad?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "It was a setup," I said, giving him the short version. Alex pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Isabella, I told you from the beginning that woman was trouble. She was never in love with you, Ethan. She was in love with your brain and the value it could generate for her. That doesn't matter now." I cut him off. "I need you to do a few things for me." "Name them." "First, get me out of here. File for a bail hearing. They have no direct evidence. They can't hold me for long." "Already on it. Arthur Vance is still in the ICU, condition unknown, which makes it tricky, but I can make it happen." "Second," I lowered my voice, "I need you to run a full forensic audit on the Blue Ocean project, specifically the overseas investments handled by Mark Peterson. The books will look clean, but I want the best auditors you can find. I want them to dig so deep they hit bedrock." Alex's eyes narrowed. "You think they were embezzling?" "I don't think." "I know," I scoffed. Isabella was always complaining her share of the company wasn't enough. And that idiot Mark, who's good for nothing but kissing ass, somehow made VP in just a few years and started driving a McLaren. There's no way they weren't skimming off the company. "Consider it done." Alex nodded. "What else?" "Third, and this is the most important," I looked him directly in the eye, speaking each word with precision. "I need you to contact someone for me, a private investigator who goes by Silas. Tell him the Reckoning Protocol is now active. It's time to close the net." Alex froze. He knew who Silas was, the most connected and discreet information broker in the city's underbelly. He just never imagined I had him on my payroll. "Ethan." Alex's expression was one of pure shock. "When did you start?" "A year ago," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "The first time I smelled cologne in Isabella's car that wasn't mine. It was a niche brand, one that Mark Peterson favored. From that day forward, I knew the ivory tower I had built with love and innovation had a crack in its foundation. I didn't explode with rage or confront her like most men would have. I knew with a woman like Isabella, the moment I showed my hand, she would use the full force of the Vance name to kick me out of my own company, probably with nothing but the clothes on my back. So I played the long game. I stayed silent and started making my own moves. I hired Silas on a heavy retainer to watch Isabella and Mark 24/7. Every secret meeting, every whispered conspiracy, every illicit transfer of funds was recorded and encrypted in a file on Silas's server. I thought that with that evidence, I could force a quiet, civilized divorce. I thought I could protect my son and the company I poured my life into. I never imagined she would be so much more ruthless than I was. She wasn't content with just half of my assets. She wanted it all, and she was willing to use her own father's life and her own son's innocence to get it. "Alex," I said, looking at my old friend as a fire I hadn't felt in years ignited in my gut. "This time, I don't just want them exposed. I want them to lose everything. I want to drag them down to hell." A week later, I was released on bail. Arthur Vance's surgery had been successful, but he'd slipped into a deep coma, a vegetative state. It was part of their plan, a victim who could never speak the truth. As I walked out of the precinct, the sunlight felt harsh. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the office. When I pushed open the doors to the executive suite on the top floor of the Astrotech Tower, the scene inside was even more cliché than I'd imagined. Isabella was sitting in my chair behind my desk. Mark stood behind her, his hand resting intimately on her shoulder. On the desk was a half-empty bottle of Romanée-Conti and 2 wine glasses. My sudden appearance shattered the cozy atmosphere. Isabella's face went white, a look quickly replaced by a mask of forced composure and rage. "Ethan, what are you doing out?" Mark panicked, instinctively snatching his hand back, but it was too late. "What's the matter?" Disappointed to see me, I walked slowly into the room, my eyes glancing at where his hand had been, a sarcastic smile playing on my lips. "Were you hoping I'd rot in a cell for the rest of my life, so you two snakes could legitimize this little takeover of yours?" "What are you talking about?" Isabella shrieked, like a cornered animal. "Ethan, you're a murderer. You have no right to be here. Security. Where's security?" "Don't bother," I said, walking to the desk. I picked up the ridiculously expensive bottle of wine, poured myself a glass, and swirled the deep red liquid. "As long as I'm the majority shareholder and legal representative of this company, security reports to me." My words landed like a sledgehammer. It was true. Isabella was the CEO, but I had designed Astroteca's corporate structure specifically to prevent a hostile takeover by the Van Cess. I held 51% of the voting shares, a controlling interest. The Vance family held 30%, and the other 19% was public float. Without my consent, no one could touch me. Their plan to send me to prison was a legal maneuver to have me declared unfit to perform my duties, allowing the second largest shareholder, the Vance family, to assume my authority and seize the company. "Don't get cocky, Ethan," Mark snarled, his bravado paper thin. "The case against you for trying to kill the chairman isn't over. The board has already voted to suspend all of your duties. Isabella is in full command." "Is that so?" I took a sip of the wine. It was excellent. "Mark, have you forgotten how I promoted you from a junior project manager to the seat you're in today? Every single report you've submitted, every proposal you've drafted, wasn't my red pen that fixed every word. You think you're in any position to talk to me about the board?" Mark's face turned a deep, blotchy red. I ignored him, turning my attention to Isabella, the woman I had loved for 8 years. "Isabella, I've been wondering," I asked softly, as if discussing the weather. "Why? Wasn't what I gave you enough? The prestige, the power, the wealth. I gave you everything I had to make you the respected CEO everyone admires. Why betray me for him?" I gestured vaguely at the useless lump of ambition standing behind her. A storm of emotions crossed Isabella's face. Guilt, malice, but mostly a kind of hysterical madness. "Enough? It's never enough," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You don't get it, Ethan. Did you think giving me things would make me grateful? You were an orphan with nothing. What right did you have to stand beside me? Everyone said I was slumming it, that I'd married beneath me. Do you have any idea how sick it made me to see the pity in their eyes every time we walked into a room together? I wanted a man I could look up to, a man worthy of Isabella Vance, not some charity case who only got a start because my father invested in him. And why should you have 51% of the stock? This is a Vance company. You were just an employee." So that was it. In her eyes, all my work, my genius, my success, was tainted by the original sin of my background. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Well said." I clapped slowly. "So, you and Mark conspired to funnel company money into your own shell corporations while plotting to send me to prison to get rid of me once and for all." The moment I said shell corporations, the color drained from both of their faces. How could you know that?" "Secrets have a way of coming out," I said, setting my glass down. My gaze turned as cold as the interrogation room lights. "Isabella, Mark, your game is over." After I dropped this shell corporation bomb, Isabella and Mark completely fell apart. They never imagined that me, the nerd who only cared about code, would have a clue about their financial schemes. "Ethan, don't you dare make baseless accusations." Isabella blustered, trying to regain her footing. "Where's your proof?" "Proof?" I pulled a thick file from my briefcase and tossed it on the desk. "This is the complete forensic audit of the Blue Ocean Project, courtesy of Alex Chen's team. It took them 3 days and nights. It shows that over the past year, 3 investments totaling $50 million were funneled to a shell company in the British Virgin Islands. A company registered to a Mark P. Sound familiar, Mark?" Sweat beaded on Mark's forehead. His knees buckled, and he nearly collapsed. Isabella snatched the report, her face a mask of disbelief. She flipped through the pages frantically, muttering, "Impossible. The books were balanced. There's no way they could have found it." "Anything is possible," I said, looking down at her. "Did you really think that fancy accounting firm Mark hired was foolproof? You didn't know the senior partner is my old professor from MIT. It only took one phone call. Sometimes your network is more powerful than money." Arthur Vance had taught me that. Now I was using his lesson against his own daughter. "Isabella, embezzlement, misappropriation of corporate funds. That's a federal crime. You know how many years you'll get for that, don't you?" "No, Ethan, you can't." She finally broke, lunging to grab my arm. I sidestepped her, disgusted. She stumbled and fell to the floor, looking up at me with genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. "We're married, for better or for worse. What good does this do you? The company will suffer." "Mary," I laughed as if it were the funniest joke I'd ever heard. "We stopped being married the moment you sent me to the police. As for the company, don't worry. It'll be fine. Without you two parasites draining it dry, Astrotech will be better than ever." "What about Cody? He's your son. Do you want him to have a mother in prison?" She played her last card. The mention of my son was a sharp, unavoidable pain. I crouched down, looking at the woman I once loved more than life itself. "You were the one," I said, enunciating every word, "who taught him to point at his own father and call him a murderer. From that moment on, Isabella, you were no longer fit to be his mother." Without another glance, I turned and walked away. Alex was waiting outside the door with several police officers and federal agents. "Officers, I'd like to report a crime," I said, gesturing back into the office. "Isabella Vance, the CEO of Astrotech, and Mark Peterson, the VP, are suspected of embezzlement and corporate fraud. I have all the evidence you need." As the police led Isabella and Mark away in handcuffs, their faces were ashen. The entire office was in an uproar. The employees stared at me with a mixture of awe and fear. They had never imagined that the quiet, mild-mannered Mr. Hayes, the tech genius, was capable of such a ruthless counterattack. I called an emergency board meeting, presented the evidence, and formally removed Isabella and Mark from all their positions. The Vance family representative, my brother-in-law Julian, sat through the entire meeting without saying a word, his face pale and drawn. He knew, of course. He was in on his sister's schemes. He was just gambling that I didn't have direct proof against him. He gambled wrong. As the meeting adjourned, I called out to him. "Julian." He stiffened, forcing a smile that was more like a grimace. "Mr. Hayes, what can I do for you?" "A little parting gift," I said, handing him another manila folder. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were copies of doctor contracts he had signed with project managers, along with records of kickbacks he had received from inflating procurement costs. Every transaction was meticulously documented. Julian stared at me, speechless with terror. "Consider this a family courtesy," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Go to the authorities, confess, and return every cent you stole. If you do, I might consider providing a statement of leniency to the court. If not, well, you know the consequences." Julian's legs gave out, and he slumped into a chair, utterly defeated. In a single day, the Vance family's influence over Astrotech was systematically and completely eradicated. By the time I had cleaned house at the office, night had fallen. I drove back to the mansion that I once called home. The nanny saw me and froze, too scared to speak. "Where's Cody?" I asked. In his room. He hasn't eaten all day." I pushed open my son's door. His small frame was curled up on his bed, clutching an Iron Man action figure. He flinched at the sound of the door opening. When he saw it was me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Daddy," he whispered. I walked over and sat on the edge of his bed. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an explanation. I just watched him for a moment and then asked softly, "Cody, can you tell Daddy what you really saw that day?" He was just a kid. Under my calm gaze, the dam of his fear and confusion finally broke. With a gut-wrenching sob, he threw himself in my arms and cried his heart out. "Daddy, I am sorry. I didn't see you push Grandpa. Mommy told me to say that." Between choked sobs, the whole story came out. He had accidentally overheard Isabella and Mark plotting in the study. When Isabella found him, Instead of comforting him, she twisted his fear and his trust in her into a weapon. She told him they were going to play a game to protect Daddy. All he had to do was tell the police he saw Daddy accidentally push Grandpa. If he did, she said, the police wouldn't take Mommy or Uncle Mark away, and Daddy would get to come home very soon. And my innocent son believed her. He thought he was saving me. He had no idea he was the knife his mother used to stab me in the heart. Listening to his story, I held his small, trembling body, a storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger, heartbreak, but more than anything, a chilling, profound horror at what Isabella had done. Even a most venomous snake protects its young. But she, for her own greed, had poisoned our son's mind. Sure, it's okay. Stop crying, I whispered, stroking his back. Daddy's not mad at you. It's my fault. I should have protected you better. I stayed with Cody until he cried himself to sleep in my arms. Looking at his peaceful face, I made a vow. This war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Isabella and Mark would go to prison for embezzlement, but not forever. Julian would get an even lighter sentence for cooperating. The moment they got out, they would come for me. I couldn't give them that chance. I called Alex. Alex, I need you to do one more thing. File for divorce. I want full, sole custody of Cody. And I want Isabella to walk away with absolutely nothing. I want the court to ensure she never sees our son again. There was a pause on the other end. Ethan, with the proof of infidelity and fraud, the divorce and custody are a slam dunk. But getting her to leave with nothing, that's almost impossible under state law. Marital assets are marital assets. I know, I said, my voice as cold as ice. That's why I need you to do one more thing. Remember Silas, the investigator I told you to contact. He has something for me. Something I've been saving. What is it? It's the key to her complete and utter ruin. The day before our divorce hearing, Isabella's mother, my mother-in-law, found me. She ambushed me in a lobby of my office building, crying and pleading, stopping just short of getting on her knees. Ethan, please, let Isabella go. She made a mistake. She was confused. For Cody's sake, for her father who's still lying in a hospital bed. Please, have mercy. I looked at this elegant woman, now a disheveled, weeping mess, and felt nothing. A mistake. Conspiring with her lover to gut my company, frame me for attempted murder, and use her own son as a false witness. That's a mistake? Ma'am, I couldn't even bring myself to call her by her name. You should be asking your daughter if she ever thought about Cody, or her father, when she was making her mistakes. She knows she was wrong. She really does. She clutched at my sleeve. Ethan, if you drop the charges and the divorce, will agree to anything. Her shares in the company, the Vance family shares, will sign them all over to you. Please. Her performance was so pathetic, it was almost laughable. This family truly shared a talent for the dramatic. Did they really think this was still about shares? It's too late, I said, pulling my arm free. You can't unring a bell. I'll see you in court. I walked away, ignoring the torrent of sobs and curses she screamed at my back. The next day in court, Isabella and I faced each other from across the room, seated at the plaintiff and defendant tables. She was thinner, her face gaunt, but the look in her eyes was pure venom. The proceedings went smoothly. Alex presented the mountain of evidence Silas had compiled. Photos, videos, hotel receipts documenting Isabella's affair with Mark. He followed it with the official court judgments for their embezzlement and fraud charges. Isabella's lawyer was hopelessly outmatched, unable to counter any of it. The divorce was a certainty. Custody of Cody was awarded to me without question. The only point of contention was the division of assets. According to Washington state law, community property is divided equitably. Even though Isabella was the at-fault party, she was still entitled to a significant portion of our shared assets, including company stock and real estate. We were talking about a fortune in the billions. Her lawyer argued that she was entitled to half of my 51% stake in Astrotech, a full 5%. That was her endgame. She figured she could do a few years in prison and walk out a billionaire, ready to start over. I object, Alex stated, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the courtroom chatter. My client, Mr. Ethan Hayes, is petitioning the court to deny the defendant, Ms. Isabella Vance, any and all marital assets. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Isabella shot up from her seat. That's impossible. Ethan, you bastard, you can't. The judge banged his gavel. Counselor, on what grounds? Alex, completely unfazed, pulled one last document from his briefcase. Your Honor, he said, handing the file to the clerk, I present to the court a prenuptial agreement. Isabella froze. I froze. I had no memory of ever signing a prenup. Alex shot me a look so subtle no one else saw it, then turned back to the judge. This agreement was signed by Mr. Hayes and Ms. Vance 8 years ago, the day before their wedding. It was drafted and witnessed by none other than Arthur Vance, the defendant's own father. An image of the document flashed onto the large screen in the courtroom. Everyone could see it clearly. There was only one major clause. In the event the marriage is dissolved due to a material breach by one party, including but not limited to infidelity, domestic abuse, or the commission of a felony, the at-fault party forfeits all claims to any and all shared marital assets. And at the bottom were two signatures, mine and Isabella's. And below that, the signature of the witness, Arthur Vance, alongside the official stamp of a notary public. Isabella stared at the screen as if she'd seen a ghost. That's a fake. It's a forgery. I never signed that, she shrieked. Ethan, you forged this. I'll sue you for perjury. The judge turned to me. Mr. Hayes, the defendant contests the authenticity of this document. Do you have a response? Every eye in the room was on me. I stood up and walked to the witness stand. My own mind was reeling, but I knew I had to trust Alex. This was his play. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I must admit, I was not aware of this agreement's existence until recently. My words sent another shockwave through the room. A triumphant smirk spread across Isabella's face. However, I continued. Yesterday, an associate of a man I deeply respect delivered this document to me. He told me it was a wedding gift from 8 years ago, a final failsafe to protect the marriage. That man, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, was my father-in-law, Arthur Vance. As the words left my mouth, the large doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A nurse pushed a wheelchair into the room. Seated in it was a man who, though pale, looked alert and sharp. It was the man who was supposed to be in a coma in the ICU, the victim who was never supposed to speak again, Arthur Vance. The courtroom fell into a dead, stunned silence. Isabella's scream died in her throat. The blood drained from her face, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Dad, she stammered, a choked, inhuman sound. No, it can't be. You're not. You were. Arthur didn't even look at her. His gaze found mine across the crowded room. His eyes, once so stern and critical of me, now held a complex mix of guilt, pride, and grim determination. Your Honor, he said, his voice weak but clear, that prenuptial agreement is authentic. I made them sign it myself. The judge, as shocked as anyone, banged his gavel. Order. Witness, please state your condition. Weren't you in critical care? Arthur managed a faint smile. My apologies for the alarm. I had a bad case of the flu. At my age, it takes a while to recover. As for the rumors of a coma, I believe those were fabrications by my disappointing daughter and certain hospital staff to serve her own agenda. His head turned, and his gaze, now like a shard of ice, finally fell upon Isabella. Isabella! His bark of a word made her flinch violently. Did you think I was old and senile? That I wouldn't see what you and that parasite were doing? The old man slammed his fist on the armrest of his wheelchair, his voice filled with anguish. I knew about you and Mark Peterson. I warned you to end it, but you wouldn't listen. And then you cooked up this disgusting, evil plan to frame the one man who has ever truly supported you, who built this family's future. Dad, no, it wasn't me. Isabella babbled, unable to meet his eyes. No, Arthur sneered. Do you think I'm deaf? I heard you and Mark on the terrace that day. I heard every word. How you were going to stage an accident, push me, and pin it on Ethan. How you would get Cody to be your star witness to make sure he never saw the light of day again. When I heard your plan, the shock nearly gave me a real heart attack. I knew I couldn't stop you too. You were blinded by greed. So, I had to play your game. The old man's eyes shifted back to me, a hint of apology in them. Ethan, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That day, I lost my balance and fell on my own. What I didn't count on was that my own daughter would be so monstrous as to deny me medical care, to bribe a doctor, to pump me full of sedatives, to induce a coma, just to make sure I could never tell my story. Luckily, I had my own plan. My personal physician switched out the drugs and helped me fake the critical condition. All for this moment, to be here in this courtroom and expose you for the monster you are. Every word Arthur spoke was a hammer blow, not just to Isabella, but to everyone in the room. The truth was finally revealed. This was never a story about a greedy son-in-law. It was the tragedy of a father who had to risk his own life to protect the man he truly considered his family from his own flesh and blood. I stood there, looking at the old man in the wheelchair, a whirlwind of emotions inside me. I always thought Arthur Vance saw me as nothing more than a tool, a cash-generating asset for his family. I never dreamed that when it mattered most, he would choose my side. All my careful planning, all my counter-schemes. He had been 10 steps ahead of me the entire time. His plan was deeper, more absolute. He wasn't just saving me, his grandson, and the future of Astrotech. He was here to clean house. Reckoning. Isabella Vance was broken. Her face was a blank, ashen mask, her eyes empty. Impossible. Impossible, she whispered over and over. Every lie she had constructed was torn to shreds in the face of the undeniable truth. Dad, why would you do this to me? I'm your daughter. She wept, a final, desperate plea. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided to have me killed, Arthur said, closing his eyes, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and profound disappointment. I have lived my life as an honorable man. How I raised a viper like you, I will never know. He opened his eyes and looked at the judge. Your Honor, I formally request that this court refer my daughter, Isabella Vance, the former VP of Astrotech, Mark Peterson, and my son, Julian Vance, to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, perjury, and felony fraud. Furthermore, I will serve as the primary witness for the prosecution. That was the checkmate. This wasn't just about a divorce or leaving with nothing. Arthur Vance was going to personally send his own children to prison. After that, everything was a formality. The judge ruled immediately. The divorce was granted, and I was awarded full and sole custody of my son, Cody. Based on the validated prenuptial agreement and the overwhelming evidence of Isabella's fault in the dissolution of the marriage, she was stripped of all claims to our shared assets. She would leave with nothing. The moment the judge's gavel fell, court officers moved in and, on the basis of her father's testimony, arrested Isabella once again. As the familiar cold steel of handcuffs closed around her wrists for a second time, she finally snapped. Her eyes, burning with pure hatred, darted from me to her father. Ethan, Arthur Vance, I hope you both rot in hell. I'll see you there if it's the last thing I do. I ignored her curses. I walked over to Arthur Vance and bowed deeply. Thank you, Dad. It was the first time in 8 years I had called him that and truly meant it. The old man looked up at me, his tired eyes glistening. He patted my hand. My boy, the Vance family wronged you. From now on, Cody and the company, they're in your hands. Isabella's fate was worse than anything I could have engineered on my own. With Arthur Vance as the star witness, the prosecution's case was airtight. Conspiracy, attempted murder, perjury, embezzlement, fraud. The list went on. Isabella was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Mark got 18. Julian, thanks to his cooperation and returning the stolen funds, got 8. The Vance family was ruined. My mother-in-law suffered a complete breakdown and was moved to a long-term care facility. A once powerful dynasty erased. I moved quickly, purging the last remnants of the old guard from Astrotech and consolidating my control. Freed from its parasites, the company soared. Our core technology disrupted the market, and within a year, Astrotech's valuation tripled, making us an undisputed titan in the tech industry. I brought Cody home and hired the best child psychologist in the state to help him process the trauma. For a long time, he was quiet, withdrawn. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I never pushed him. I just read to him every night. We spent weekends at the Science Center, hiking Mount Rainier, and sailing on Lake Union. I showed him, day by day, that the world could be a dark place, but his father would always be his rock. About 6 months later, I was tucking him into bed. As I turned to leave, he suddenly wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. "I'm sorry, Daddy," he whispered. I turned and stroked his hair. "You have nothing to be sorry for, kiddo. This was on me." He shook his head, his eyes shining in the dim light. "No, you're the hero. You're like Iron Man, who beat all the bad guys." In that moment, I knew. My son was back. I started taking Cody with me to visit Arthur. His health was failing, but his spirits were high. Seeing his grandson always brought a smile to his face. He signed over the last of the Vance family assets into a trust fund for Cody, with me as the trustee. He passed away on a sunny afternoon. He held my hand and said, "Ethan, don't hate Isabella. No, on second thought, hate her. Just don't let your son meet anyone like us Vance says in his next life. And be good to him." I nodded and gave him my solemn promise. I arranged a dignified funeral for him. What I never told anyone was that I knew about Arthur's plan all along. The day after my arrest, Alex had brought me a handwritten letter from him. In it, Arthur had laid out his entire strategy, including the existence of the prenup I'd long forgotten. We really had signed it 8 years ago. I'd been so madly in love that I would have signed anything Isabella put in front of me without reading it. She, in her arrogance, had clearly forgotten it ever existed. But Arthur, like a master chess player, had quietly set his most powerful piece on the board, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. From opposite sides of a prison wall, a father-in-law and son-in-law had executed the perfect checkmate. Months later, when the dust had finally settled, Alex and I met for a drink. "So how does it feel?" he asked, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "Vengeance is sweet, but does it leave you feeling a little empty?" I took a sip of my own whiskey, the burn of familiar comfort. I smiled and shook my head. "No, I don't feel empty at all." I looked out the window of the high-rise bar, at the million lights of the city spread out below like a galaxy. My son was waiting for me at home. My company was thriving. My future was a vast, open frontier. As for the people who betrayed and tried to destroy me, they were exactly where they deserved to be, with nothing but the rest of their lives to contemplate their choices. This was the best possible ending. This wasn't emptiness. It was a new beginning. Those who betray you deserve to pay the highest price. And I, with everything they try to take from me, would live better than ever before. That was enough. That was everything.